authorities of Afghanistan. We think that Afghanistan, as any other country in the world, has the right to self-determination, to elect its own representatives, to be ruled by humane, free and democratic rules, and we will stay firm to this commitment, whatever will happen, and regardless of those who manage to take power, as it happened some months ago in Afghanistan by the Taliban. We are very honored, as I said, to have here Ambassador Salarzai, and our aim is to give him the floor, to allow him to express his views to the wider general public, be it in Europe or the United States or in South and Central Asia, and to allow all of you as well to have some questions to be clarified by him. So without further delay, please, the floor is yours. Once again, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you here. Thank you for hosting me today. I will read my written speech first, and then we can open up for Q&A. Allow me to thank the South Asia Democratic Forum for organizing today's conference on Afghanistan, Rethinking Afghanistan, and welcome you all here, members of the diplomatic community, press, think tanks, and my colleagues here from the embassy, and everyone who's listening to us on the other side virtually. I'm honored to be talking here and sharing my view on what's happening in Afghanistan, and try to present some recommendation that what could be the correct course of action in Afghanistan, especially in the face of the humanitarian crisis that we are facing. Taliban seized power through force on 15 August against the provision of the infamous Doha deal between the United States and Taliban, and against the unified call of all the international community that a government imposed by force would not be recognized by the world. Instead, the Taliban have forced themselves on a country of 35 million population, disrupting the constitutional order, threatening the 20 years of achievement, including human rights, newly democratic institutions, governments, economy, social justice. In short, undermining Afghanistan image as a proud nation among the Society of Nations, and undermining an important opportunity for inclusive political settlement that would have set the country on course for long-term security and stability following the departure of international forces from the country. In the face of so many challenges, Afghanistan is literally absent from in the international community and multilateral bilateral discussions and debates. The Taliban enjoy little genuine support in the region or on the world stage beyond their special relationship with Pakistan, which might come to regret its role in the unraveling of a flawed but nonetheless Republican order in Afghanistan. Ironically, the international community, after almost 3 months of an unforeseen and unexpected collapse of Kabul and an escalating imminent humanitarian crisis, is still divided on how to deal and engage with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Their approach varies somewhere between having no relations with the Taliban to some political engagement to a principled and pragmatic approach, which calls for the Taliban meeting certain conditions on the formation of an inclusive government and respect for the rights of and freedoms of Afghan citizens, including women and girls and minorities, before a meaningful engagement or support. The Taliban seem to be craving for international legitimacy, but their action speaks otherwise. The all-Taliban cabinet with the 17 of them being on different US UN sanction lists, and not a single woman among the cabinet members, or not ethnically balanced cabinet, does not send a conciliatory message to the rest of the Afghan society and also to the international community. Islamic Emirate has been re-established with more or less the same style of governance from the 90s. Public executions are back with no major active combat in the country. Former ANDCF members are still subject to targeted killings, torture, despite a general amnesty has been declared by the Taliban. Beating and tortures are the daily practice on the streets in Kabul. Women are not allowed to go to work. Girls' schools beyond 6th grade are closed since they have taken control. The economy is at the verge of collapse. There are reports of forceful displacements in certain parts of the country. Unlawful house searches still continue. But the list is very long. And there is no easy way of describing the situation in Afghanistan. It's bleak pictures, and things will get worse before they get better, unless we act fast. And I'm sure that here, or those who are on the other side, would have many questions on why, after 20 years of international support and engagement, this happened and how. And we all owe an honest explanation to the honest and thorough explanation to the Afghan people, to the rest of the world. I will not go here as to what were the underlying causes or the main drivers of what happened in Kabul, or this messy and sudden collapse of Kabul. It's still early to draw a complete picture or a conclusion of, or do a balanced and fair analysis of who's wrong, who's right, and who has to be held responsible. But I shouldn't shy away from our own responsibility as the Afghan leadership. So the Afghan leadership is the one that first comes to mind to be held accountable and responsible for what has happened in Afghanistan. In my view, the collapse of Afghanistan was a joint collective failure of all of us, Afghanistan and its international supporters. And to fine tune it to today's reality in Afghanistan, I think it's also Taliban are also involved in what has happened in Afghanistan. So we all failed the people of Afghanistan. The reason I'm saying this is because after 20 years of strategic security partnerships with major players, big power, the United States, NATO, many other big countries, we still left behind a population of 35 million. Somehow saying that he would. For almost more than 20 years, Afghans have lost tens and thousands of their sons and daughters to an international fight against terrorism. And after that, more than 2 decades of international fights, they feel abandoned and betrayed. I will try here to just draw your attention to an immediate need that we all need to focus on, and before it's too late, that why we should get into action. What's coming ahead of us is this humanitarian catastrophe. Just to give you a glimpse of what's happening, the number of Afghans that are searching for food would be, or in need of food, is reaching quickly 20 million. It's as per the UNDP estimates in total. There will be early 2022. And the level of poverty will rise to about 90%. That's 90. Civil servants have not been paid for months, and with every day gone, the prices soar. The economy is at the verge of collapse. Airports are shut to commercial flights, borders are closed, and Afghan central bank reserves are frozen. Humanitarian intervention, I think, should be the top priority of all of us, irrespective of what we think of Taliban and their supporters in Afghanistan. And people should not suffer because of the action of the Taliban or what are they doing. And we, in the meantime, we make sure that the humanitarian assistance reaches those who are in need, and without the risk of politicizing the humanitarian assistance, and also making sure that that distribution of humanitarian assistance is done by independent humanitarian actors, both internationals and national in Afghanistan. In this connection, the 1 billion euro aid package from the G20 countries is very timely, welcome, and I hope we can, with the use of that, we can deal with the socio-economic collapse of Afghanistan. That's the overall thing. I think also the region also bears some responsibility when it comes to Afghanistan, and I think they have to step up their efforts and discharge their own responsibility, or make their own fair share of this shared responsibility in Afghanistan. What will be their responsibility? I think one is the humanitarian. I think on the political and diplomatic side, the region finally has to speak with one voice. I'm sure that should be at least the one thing they should have learned from the Afghan case. Our instability is their instability. Our insecurity is their insecurity. If there are crises, I think the spillover will be, they will have to also deal with it. I think this is what they all know. They agree on it. And what I'm saying that we have to learn from it is that the consensus, the regional consensus that we have been speaking all along for 20 years, at least should translate into some concrete action when it comes to Afghanistan. If they are afraid of the humanitarian crisis, the migration crisis, terrorism, drugs, or insecurity, I think that the best way forward would be to deal with Afghanistan on a very, let's say, that constructive and positive approach, and better engage constructively. And what we have seen is that we see certain things on paper or on public statements are one thing, but the reality on the ground is the other. My advice as an ambassador of Afghanistan would be to refrain from these ad hoc tactical approaches to Afghanistan and rather engage in more strategic approach, which is development and security oriented. I think we have to, it cannot go on for, now it's already more than 4 decades in Afghanistan, and we still continue to deal with it as on an ad hoc basis, which wouldn't be wise. Certain countries in the region, we know that they're very happy that the United States and NATO and other major players out of that region have lost. They are very happy about it. But the problem is that these countries who are happy with the NATO US gone from Afghanistan or EU gone, they do not offer alternative. So this has to be dealt with. To move from the region, the international community as a whole, I think they still hold a huge leverage over both the Taliban and their support. They have to use that to bring Taliban back to what they had agreed and form an inclusive and representative government, and finally deliver and live up to their commitments and make peace a reality in Afghanistan. One particular country in the region, Pakistan, should not get away with what they did to the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. If not for the sake of Afghans, I think at least for the sake of the sons and daughters of those who stood with us in the fight against international terrorism for more than 20 years. If a country is involved to that level, I think we should hold them accountable and responsible. This could happen somewhere else in the region. I will conclude, and then we'll have hopefully enough time to engage in Q&A. To avoid the humanitarian catastrophe, I think we should act now and fast, all of us, only for the sake of the people of Afghanistan. Delivering humanitarian assistance should be unconditional and kept away from politicization. Aid must not be used as a tool, or let's say a pressure tool against even the Taliban. Aid because people will suffer at the end of the day. It will only exacerbate the situation and the suffering of the Afghan people. Taliban must form an inclusive and representative government where Afghans from all walks of life can see themselves in that government, or in other words, a representative government that we all want. Minorities are not absent from their country. Women are absent, so we need an inclusive and representative government. Regional consensus, as I said earlier, has to be strengthened, but strengthened for the sake of, let's say, the concrete actions. All along these 20 years, we've never had a comprehensive counter-terrorism strategy in the region. I can have a frank discussion here, saying one country will say it's yours, the other says it's yours, and they never own the problem in the region. We never own the problem in the region. So in the absence of a strong regional consensus, again, Afghanistan case will continue. And Taliban must realize and understand that they are facing a changed Afghanistan. Change Afghanistan, that Afghanistan has changed in many positive ways since the last they were in power in Afghanistan. It's not the Afghanistan of the 90s. And they should also at least learn a lesson from us. If winner takes all situation did not work for us, it will not work for the Taliban also. The wider international community at least must have learned this time that unilateral concessions to the Taliban did not yield the intended result. And while we still hold leverages over the Taliban, I think this time we have to use it wisely and correctly, so that Taliban will not have it for in return for nothing, as we saw during the negotiations that this happened. On the surface, you see there might be a ceasefire, but to sustain that, it requires change of course. And it may look that there is not an active combat going on, but soon, if Taliban do not change the course, the situation will turn. And so I think to sum it up, I think the last sentence of mine would be, I think, relevant to today's conference would be that I think it's time for Taliban to rethink. And I thank you all and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I think that you made a very clear speech. You put names on issues. You set priorities. I think you were absolutely clear and very, very instigating a lot of reflections, I'm sure, from all of us. We will now have a period of debate. I will try to get here in WhatsApp questions that will come from social media. Anyway, we will naturally start by those who are present, and of course, those who are present who will be likely to give the priority to the diplomatic representations that are here, but of course the journalists as well. I don't know who wants to start the debate. Who wants to raise the first questions? Yes,
Yes,
please.
Mr. I have a
From
question.
French embassy.
I have a question when it comes to Pakistan. You said that this country had to be held responsible for the crisis. What does it mean, practically speaking?
Well, I think Pakistan is a long-term traditional supporter of Taliban. If it wasn't for a very strong supporter by Pakistan alongside the border, and I think in the giving sanctuary and safe havens to the Taliban, you think the coalition of more than 40 countries would have not been able to deal with 30,000 Taliban? So there was this infinite flow of Taliban from Pakistan, and they enjoyed all kinds of supports from Pakistan. You name it, political, logistical, ideological, all sort of support was always there. So, and I think there is plenty of evidence to what I say, and I'm sure that many of you who have been involved in Afghanistan have it time and again verified that substantiated at least that when Pakistan said that we alleged them, it's not here, these are not allegations. I think the recent efforts speaks volume to their long-term connections with Taliban, where they go around and literally lobby on behalf of them in the different capitals and international forums. So I think what I'm saying is that to use force for your political or violence for your political gains, or we say that short-term political gains in Afghanistan, this is what has to be, I think there has to be a collective response from the members of the international community. When I say that it shouldn't get away with it, I think for 20 years, hundreds of, or close to 2 trillion of USD of aid was spent from our international partners, and at the end of the day, we end up in the same place. Just because they had a support for the region, and they never stopped supporting. We all work for a prosperous Afghanistan, for an Afghanistan that would be a responsible and a member of the international community. But just because someone could do a lot with little support, this is what happened.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, Alberto.
Yes, if I may. Thank you, Ambassador, for your intervention. So my question, moving forward, what role do you foresee for the Central Asian countries, particularly Kazakhstan, considering the amount of political capital that the region has invested in recent years to integrate Afghanistan into the region?
Thank you, Alberto. I think with Central Asia, we share a lot, and we have a lot in common with them, and I think and they do understand by now that what is the correct course of action for them. if you look at the approach they had toward Afghanistan, let's say that 15 or 20 years back was more of stay away from Afghanistan. Obviously, try to make sure that the borders are strong, but not this constructive engagement. This changed, and I'm sure that they have learned from that. And with Taliban in power, I'm sure that we all know that the kind of concerns our Central Asian partners and Central Asian countries have. If that's not dealt with, I'm sure that it will reach there. The Taliban ideology, we all know, will not be confined only to Afghanistan. It will travel. It will travel, and I think the prime recipients of that ideology will be the Central Asian countries. So they, like many others, also enjoy a huge amount of leverage over the Taliban. And I think that leverage has to be again, used wisely and encourage Taliban to form again an inclusive and representative government, so that we try to add to the region, not to be a burden to the region. And if I will give you a very simple example, if the Taliban continue with the same style or with the same cabinet that they have right now, do you think all those economic projects that we have with Central Asian countries will be realized? I don't think that they will be realized. So again, that will be a blow to the whole prosperity of the region. This is one clear example of that. And then I think you know the reports that are out there, at least by the United Nations, that Taliban have not seized ties with certain terrorist groups. So how do you address those concerns that you have in the region? And the only way to make sure is, I think that a government, that those who know how these things work. And Islamic Republic of Afghanistan is not there, but I think we knew what your concerns were and how we attended those concerns and how we addressed them.
I have a question, the first question here by social media. It is coming from Chris Blackburn, and I think it goes a bit on the sequence of the two preceding questions. Pakistan has set fires across South Asia, like Bangladesh expelling their senior diplomats, Farina Arshad, for financing Al-Qaeda and Pakistan's support for the Taliban. What can the region do to respond?
Well, I think here, as I say, that the region is unfortunately shying away from the problem that exists there. I think one of the issues that we have all along been saying was the issue of addressing the safe haven and sanctuaries in Pakistan. But it was never addressed the way it should have been. And we time and again have told our international partners that if Taliban take over, it won't stay in Afghanistan. The takeover will not stay in Afghanistan. And the kind of message this will be sending to the rest of the terrorist groups or groups who believe in violent extremism in the region, you think they won't? They will stop? I think this is inspiring them. And it's not only in our part of the region. You go and when Taliban came to seize the power in Kabul, some of the extremist forces in Africa were celebrating the victory. So what I see that, or once we have to learn a lesson from the Afghan cases, that those who support, regardless of who it is, shouldn't get away with it, because these kinds of it's like, as we say in our language, you can not always keep a snake in your sleeve. Sooner or later, it will come out and bite.
So, Manal Salmi,
thank you so much.
from Brussels,
Thank
please.
you so much, Your Excellency. Thank you, Paolo, for this initiative. We were talking about Pakistan because it's one of the countries negotiating with Europe. So, what do you think about GPS Plus initiative? And is it possible that the European Union puts pressure on Pakistan through this, let's say, deal in order to respect minorities' rights and women's rights, which is the case also in Pakistan regarding minorities and women? And can we use this as a tool of pressure also regarding Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think definitely. Why not? I think I wouldn't go. The way Pakistan does, I wouldn't go to tell them what to do with their government. But we have a recommendation to them. If they want a Taliban-style government for us, why they don't want it for themselves? We would very much want to see their own TTP take power in Pakistan. Why they can't do it? When they come and they tell us and tell the world also, it's not only telling us. I think for now to go and do, how do you say, to go and what I think for in the case of Afghanistan, we have to once again, I think if we who have grown up in conflict, we should be more forward looking again, because we're dealing with the situation. To undo what has happened, I think it will take us ages. And I think what we are asking for is whatever leverage is left there, either the countries in the region, the political forces inside Afghanistan, and the international community as a whole. Use them all so that we see an inclusive, representative government in Afghanistan. I think that's the only way at this stage. None of the members of the international community will go after Pakistan because of us. It would be naive to ask for something like that. But we are a very, obviously, a very living example of what happens when the international community remains silent, or rather, we have a passive approach towards it.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Wolf, please.
Yes, thank you very much for my side, the Excellency, for your very interesting insight to share with us. You mentioned that the Afghan society changed. Absolutely, I agree with that. And we should also emphasize that this is a major gain of the last 20 years. People in this direction who were thinking we left nothing behind. I mean, but we have also another change which we didn't have in the 90s. In the 90s, we had at least some areas in Afghanistan which were much better than me, which were resisting the Taliban government. So today we have a situation, of course, we have changed society, but we have also a Taliban which controls more or less an area which they never controlled before in terms of size. When it comes to the talk about potential civil war, armed resistance from in the Afghan society, I'm wondering who could be these groups or people when you think particularly the major anti-Taliban figures disappeared now. So what we can expect? Are we going to an implosion of the Taliban government, considering all the problems we have now in Afghanistan, from food crisis to the lack of any skills to run a country, which is attached to the Taliban rule? And now, are we facing perhaps a kind of revolution? But I don't see somehow a kind of civil war, which in the classical sense.
I would put it this way. I think, yeah, I agree with you that it's not the way it was in the 90s. But I think what we see much more change compared to the 90s, I think it's again from the within society. Have you ever seen in the 90s that women went out and marched on the street asking for their rights? That never happened in the 90s. Never ever. Same way you did not see a single woman on any TV. We did not even have a single private TV. So I think in that sense, there is a huge difference. But when it comes to how to get rid of, let's say, the Taliban, or how will the Taliban be gone, I think there are a number of factors. The resistance there, and they might be small pockets, but I think if people do not have their voices heard, if people do not see themselves represented, if their rights are violated, if they are forcefully displaced, if I don't know, all the economy gets worse, the country is isolated. So it's a huge. I mean, each one of them have the potential to turn into serious threats to the Taliban. And I think on the top of it, the issue of Daesh adds to that. Their own internal differences of the Taliban, how to govern the country. Some of them saying that being more moderate, some of them saying that radical extremist type. So I think there are a lot of factors that if you just think about how to get rid of the Taliban. But the question will remain that I think at this stage here is that how to make a correct course for the country, so that what we have is not lost totally. In that sense, I think Taliban have to come to their senses that this country does not belong to them, and they cannot rule alone the country. They are not experts of the governance. They have never governed properly the country. How do you expect that from them? And with the type of cabinet they have put in place, and when there is no international recognition of what they have done, how do you feed the 35 million population? Forget about security for a minute. How do you feed them? And if even in our during the Islamic Republic time, 50% or more than 50% of the country was run by aid. How do you secure that aid while having 17 of your ministers wanted around the world? Do you think the world will give you a penny for that? You violate the rights of minorities. You do not allow women. You publicly execute. I don't know. There is no due process in the country. So I think these are all. One can say that, as I said during my opening speech, that it might look peaceful on the surface, but it cannot sustain like that. Sooner or later, they have to face the public anger.
Mr. Ambassador, I would dare to come back to one of the first aspects of your speech. which was exactly the G20 and the figures that were put forward. Mentioned 1 billion euros. I think it was even more than that. But shouldn't we expect that the countries that publicly and ostensibly supported the Taliban takeover? Well, Pakistan is obviously the most important case that you rightly mentioned, that in the day of the fall of Kabul said that the shackles of slavery had been broken. But we could also quote China, that was the most important diplomatic support. So just some weeks before the fall of Kabul, the foreign affairs minister received in the most important and symbolic palace in China for this sort of occasions, the 9 main Taliban commanders, or for that matter, Qatar, that for several years hosted an open office of the Taliban. I mean, these 3 countries are the most obvious in my mind. Wouldn't you think reasonable for them to step forward in face of this scenario that you very objectively describe as catastrophic?
Well, I think if you look at who is still operating in Kabul, I think there are 5 countries. It's Pakistan, China, Iran, Qatar, and Iran. Pakistan, China, Qatar, Turkey. Yeah, Turkey. These are the 5 countries still operating. Why none of them have so far recognized the Taliban officially, or no one has recognized? I think at least we were all expecting that Pakistan would be the first one to do that, and they are not doing it. They haven't done it yet publicly, I think, but their actions are even more than recognizing the way they have engaged with I think there are 2 explanations for that. One is that even none of these countries that supported the Taliban expected something like this to happen. And I think this forcing themselves on the people of Afghanistan have given the Taliban a very, to be honest, a very false or in a way true sense of arrogance to them, saying that we were right, we came to power, and now deal with us. So how you deal with them is that once you are sure that your concerns are average, and these concerns that we mentioned, some are afraid of Daesh, some are afraid of Al-Qaeda, some are afraid of, I think each Central Asian country is afraid of a particular group that have traditionally either flourished or either been supported under the umbrella of the Taliban. I'm sure that they haven't received those assurances from the Taliban yet, and having lived under the Taliban, not as an ambassador or as a worker, just as a student, I can tell you that they haven't changed. They haven't changed, and they think that the words owes them, and they have to be recognized, and even they to a certain extent think that the assistance should also be provided unconditionally, just because, I don't know. To put it this way, that it's difficult to deal with the Taliban. I think the only way would be that Taliban have, I think, some sense has to be knocked into the Taliban. And these countries can definitely, of course, definitely can play a very effective role in that. I mean, they should do that. I think as simple as that.
And if you want to raise any more issues, I think that we have just been offered very, very dense, very concrete set of advice done in a diplomatic way, of course, but clear enough, I think, for everyone to understand. If Your Excellency, if you will allow me, I think that one of the crucial points is actually the way that the European Union dealt with the situation, especially through this GSP Plus. The GSP Plus is a mechanism that is conceived as a trade incentive to those countries that behave regarding a set of humanitarian principles, environmental and humanitarian, including labors, but fundamentally political objectives, behave extraordinarily well. This incentive was started to be negotiated exactly in the wake of the elimination of Osama bin Laden in Islamabad. Well, when it became absolutely undisputable that Pakistan was the main country supporting Al Qaeda. This has been going on without any remarks. We just saw very recently in the European Parliament, the European Commission saying that everything was fantastic. This is a very powerful instrument. It is, and this instrument is something like 70 or 80% of its concessions are actually directed to Pakistan. And so this did have a clear meaning to the Pakistani authorities. I think that the European Union has a lot of responsibility on the state of affairs that it cannot forget. Since what happens to Afghanistan is obviously a concern of Afghans, but it is a concern for the international community and for Europe as well. And this is something that no one can forget and no one can put in as a secondary item. As a European citizen myself, I'm really very shocked of that things go on as they were. Nothing has changed, not even after what we saw 3 months ago. And I think that Europe has to think very clearly where it wants to stand. If it really believes in the principles that are enshrined in the treaties, and these principles are based on humanitarian values, and they are not compatible with an action that is consistently threatening these very same values. And this is, to me, my biggest concern as a European citizen. I would like to tell you that in our humble capacity, we will always be here. I think that your analysis is very clear, is very, very correct. I think that the way you are suggesting is the way that we certainly have to support. We have to support the Afghanistan people. We have to go for humanitarian aid in a clear, objective way, and we must support Afghans, people's struggle that is not necessarily made with bombs and machine guns, as you correctly said. You know, these women that are going unarmed and openly defying the Taliban are an example to us all. And this is really remarkable. And these women cannot stay alone. We cannot ignore them. We cannot say that they are different or from any other women in the world. And so we owe everything we can to support them. So once again, thank you so much for coming to us. Thank you so much to all of the members of the Afghanistan embassy here in Brussels, to the European diplomats that took the time to come here, the press, His Excellency the Consul of the Maldives, all our friends. We are really delighted for your presence. This is an issue that will not go away. We will stick to it. We will do whatever we can to support it. That I can guarantee you. Thank you so much. Well, there is not many things, but there is some coffee and tea and some biscuits. So you are very much welcome to stay around if you want.